I am John, an old man who carries more than wrinkles. The war scarred me with wounds that bleed in silence, and the town where I live spits on me as if I were trash. I survived battles where the ground shook with explosions, but nothing prepared me for the pain of being forgotten, of being called useless by eyes that never saw hell. By my side is Mary, my wife, the woman I love and whose soul was broken long before we met. Sold at 12, she faced horrors that the town turns into jokes, whispering her name as if it were a curse. I found her diary by chance, hidden like a trapped scream, and its words tore my heart apart. This is not a tale of heroes, but of two survivors the town tried to erase. Stay with me, because I will tell you how we faced cruelty, how our pains echoed, and how a diary changed everything. This is our truth, and it will burn until the end. I wake up to emptiness. The sun barely touches the cracks of our house in St. Thomas, a crooked wooden structure that creaks as if moaning with me. My name is John, and I carry 78 years of wrinkles and memories that weigh more than my body. The war marked me, not with visible wounds, but with screams that echo in my dreams. In the Second World War, I ran through fields that smelled of gunpowder and blood, holding friends who begged for their mothers as life slipped away. I returned with medals no one wants to see and nightmares that wake me screaming. Here, in the town, I'm not a soldier. I'm Old John, a rag that crosses the square under cruel laughter, a burden that survived too long. St. Thomas is a place stuck in the past, with dirt roads and houses that seem tired. The church bell rings every morning, but it brings no hope. It just reminds me that another day of scorn has begun. I walk to Joe's store, and the journey is a battle. Yesterday, a group of boys was at the corner, smoking and laughing. "Hey, crazy old man, gonna tell your war stories?" one shouted, throwing a rotten apple that hit my shoulder. The sour juice dripped down my shirt, and their laughter cut deeper than any bullet. Another boy spat on the ground close to my feet and said, "You don't fool anyone, John." Hero, my foot. I didn't answer, not because I didn't want to, but because I learned words don't change those who have already judged you. I lowered my head and kept going, feeling the weight of each step, as if the entire town were crushing me. Mary, my wife, suffers even more. She is the light of my life, but the town treats her like a shadow. Mary rarely leaves the house, and when she does, it's as if she carries an invisible chain. Last week, she went to the market, and I watched from the window as she walked, clutching her bag to her chest. Two women, Mrs. Agnes and Mrs. Clare, stopped talking when she passed, but their eyes said it all. "That's Mary, the one with the dirty past," Mrs. Agnes whispered, loud enough for Mary to hear. My wife lowered her face, her shoulders hunched, and quickened her pace. When she returned, she threw the groceries on the table and locked herself in the room. "They'll never stop," she said, her voice broken. I wanted to hug her, but she pulled away, as if my tenderness hurt more than the glares. I know pieces of what Mary endured. At 12, her father sold her to a man who treated her like property. "He locked me up at night, John," she told me once, her eyes fixed on a void I couldn't reach. I begged God to take me, but God didn't listen. She escaped at 16, running through dark roads with nothing but a torn dress and a heart that refused to die. Here, in the town, they turned her courage into gossip. Mary, the one who was a stranger's woman so young, they say, as if she chose the pain. Each whisper is a stab, and I hate myself for not knowing how to shield her from it. Sometimes, at night, I hear her cry softly, thinking I'm asleep. Each sob is a guilt I carry, because I love Mary, but I can't erase what the town does to her. We live like this, trapped in a cycle of humiliation. The town isolates us, as if we were a disease. No one invites us to the square's parties. No one asks how we are. Even the priest who should preach love avoids us at Mass, as if our scars were a sin. I try to ignore it, but some days the scorn is too much. At the last market, a man, Mr. Anthony, shoved me while I reached for bread. "Get out of the way, useless old man," he growled, and the crowd laughed as if I were a clown. I returned home with the bread in hand, but no appetite, only anger, not at them, but at myself, for letting them reduce me to nothing. Everything changed 3 days ago. I was in the yard, trying to fix a fence the wind knocked down. My shovel hit something hard, and when I dug, I found a rusted metal box, so brittle it nearly crumbled. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed by time. It was Mary's diary. The first line chilled me. "I was 12 when they took me from my mother. She cried but didn't fight for me. I sat in the dirt, the sun burning my neck, and read until night fell." Mary wrote about the man who held her captive, about nights curled up in a corner, praying not to be found. "I dreamed of freedom," she wrote, "but saw only darkness." She described her escape, how she saved hidden coins, how she ran barefoot until her feet bled, how she found a town where no one knew her. I couldn't stop reading. Each word was a punch, a revelation of a Mary I loved but never fully understood. I cried there, in the yard, with the diary in my lap, tears falling to the earth. I didn't cry in the war, nor when I buried my friends. But for Mary, I cried. For the girl she was, for the woman she became, for the pain the town turns into jokes. I felt anger, not just at the town, but at the world that let a child suffer like that. And I felt shame for never pushing to know more, for thinking my silence was enough. That night, I didn't sleep. Mary's words mingled with my nightmares, with the faces of soldiers I couldn't save. I saw her, a 12-year-old girl facing a monster while I fought in distant fields. The diary was more than a notebook. It was proof that Mary was a survivor, as much a warrior as any soldier, and I knew I couldn't keep it hidden. The town needed to know this truth, not to expose Mary, but to silence their laughter, to show she was greater than their gossip. I needed to speak too, because my silence was killing me as much as theirs. The next day, I went to the store, as always. The boys were there with their jokes ready. "What does the old man want today? More fairy tales?" said the one who threw the apple. I held the diary inside my coat, feeling it burn against my chest. I didn't answer, but for the first time I looked him in the eye. Something in me had changed. Mary deserved to be heard. I deserved to be heard. And the town would learn what it means to survive. Mary's diary burned in my hands like a coal. After finding it in the yard, I spent the night awake, her words swirling in my head like ghosts. I saw the 12-year-old girl she was, locked in a dark room, begging for a freedom no one offered. I also saw the battlefields of the Second World War, where I buried friends and promises, carrying scars that St. Thomas turns into jokes. My name is John, and I carry 78 years of pain, but that night, sitting on the porch with the moonlight as my only witness, I realized the silence that protected me was also killing me. Mary and I were prisoners, not of chains, but of the scorn that crushed us. The next morning, the sun brought courage, but also fear. I knew I had to talk to Mary about the diary, but I dreaded her reaction. She was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of beans, her face marked by wrinkles that told more than years. I sat at the table, the notebook hidden in my lap, and took a deep breath. "Mary," I said, my voice trembling, "I found something in the yard yesterday." I pulled out the diary and placed it on the table, like it was a bomb. She froze, the spoon still in the air, her eyes fixed on the cracked leather cover. "Did you read it?" she asked, so softly I barely heard. I nodded, expecting anger, but she collapsed into the chair, covering her face with her hands. "I wrote it so I wouldn't forget who I was," she said, her voice broken. "To remember there was a Mary before that man." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened, and my eyes burned with tears I fought to hold back. "Your words broke me, Mary," I managed to say. "I knew you suffered, but I didn't imagine how much." She looked up, and for the first time in years I saw the girl she described in the diary. Scared, but stubborn, with a fire no one could extinguish. "I didn't want you to know everything," she confessed. "You already carry so much, John. The war, the nightmares. I didn't want to add more weight." Her words hurt more than the town's laughter. Mary, who faced horrors alone, was still trying to protect me. I held her hand, feeling the calluses of a life of struggle, and said, "You're stronger than any soldier I ever met, and I won't let the town hurt you anymore." She cried then, a quiet cry that broke my heart. She told pieces of the past the diary didn't reveal. "I was 12 when my father handed me over," she said. "The man locked me up at night, said I was his. I prayed to die, but something in me wouldn't give up." She spoke of her escape at 16, planned in secret, stealing coins from the man's pocket while he slept. "I ran until my feet bled," she said. "I didn't know where to, only that I couldn't go back." The town turned that courage into gossip, calling her tainted, as if her pain was a choice. "Every look I get here," she murmured, "takes me back to that room." I wanted to scream, to break something, but I only held her hand tighter. "They don't know who you are," I said, "but they will." Mary shook her head, afraid. "What if they laugh more? What if they hate me?" I had no answers, but I felt a new anger, not just at the town, but at myself. For years I thought my silence was love, that protecting Mary meant hiding her pain. The diary showed I was wrong. She needed to be seen, not hidden. I don't talk much about the war. The medals I keep in a shoebox are relics of a time that haunts me. I fought in trenches where the air was poison, where I saw friends blown to pieces, their eyes begging me not to forget them. I carried a soldier named Peter for 2 kilometers, with bullets flying, only for him to die in my arms, whispering his mother's name. I returned to St. Thomas with promises I never kept, with screams that still echo when I close my eyes. The town applauded me for a day, then threw me away. Today, I'm the crazy old man who invents battles, a target for rotten apples and spit. But sitting with Mary, I realized my silence was as cruel as hers. I needed to speak too. I decided I would read the diary at the town's monthly market, where everyone gathers to buy and judge. It wouldn't be just for Mary, but for me. I wanted them to see my scars, to know I'm not a rag. I spent the day choosing passages from the notebook, careful not to expose Mary too much. I picked parts that showed her strength, how she planned her escape, counting coins by candlelight, how she learned to sew to pay for a room, how she found hope even after everything. I also wrote about the war, about the day I saved a platoon, running under fire, only to return and face scorn. "We are not what you think," I wrote. "We are survivors." Mary hesitated. Fear etched on her face. "What if they call me worse things?" she asked, wringing her hands. I hugged her, feeling her body tremble like a leaf. "They'll listen, Mary," I promised, "and those who laugh will choke on it." That night I rehearsed on the porch, with the diary open and a flickering lamp. My voice came out hoarse, heavy with years of anger and pride. I read Mary's words. "I escaped with a torn dress, but with a soul no one broke." I read about myself. I fought for men who never came back, and I carry them with me every day. Each sentence was a step out of the prison the town built around us. As I rehearsed, I looked at the house where Mary slept. I thought of the boys who throw apples, the women who whisper, the man who shoved me at the market. They didn't know what we faced, but they would. The diary wasn't just Mary's, it was ours, a scream we'd held back too long. I knew the market would be a battle, perhaps the hardest I'd ever fought. But for Mary, for me, for all the scars we carry, they would hear us, whether they wanted to or not. The words I rehearsed on the porch still echoed in my head when the day of the monthly market in St. Thomas dawned. My voice, hoarse with anger and pride, carried the weight of Mary's diary and my own scars from the Second World War. I, John, had promised her the town would hear, not just their cruel gossip, but the truth of a woman who escaped a monster at 16 and a man who faced battles where friends turned to dust. As I tucked the diary into my coat, I felt Mary watching me from the doorway. "Are you sure, John?" she asked, her eyes full of fear but also a fragile trust. I held her face, feeling the wrinkles that told her struggle, and said, "For you, Mary, I'd face anything." She nodded, a shy smile breaking through, and promised to be at the market, even if from a distance. At that moment, I knew it wasn't just for her. It was for us, for everything the town tried to erase. The sky was gray, with heavy clouds that seemed to sense the battle I'd face. The town square buzzed with the chaos of the market, fruit stalls, the smell of fresh bread, children running between legs. But for me, every face was a threat. I saw Mrs. Agnes, who whispers about Mary's dirty past, laughing with other women. I saw Michael, the boy who threw the rotten apple at my shoulder, leaning against a tree, smoking with his friends. Even Mr. Anthony, who shoved me at the last market, was there, shouting corn prices. My chest tightened, like the days I ran under enemy fire, but the diary in my coat reminded me why I was there. Mary stayed near a flower stall, clutching her skirt, her eyes fixed on me. "Don't give up," she whispered before I walked away, and that phrase carried me like an order. I climbed onto the makeshift stage, a wooden platform where the mayor announced taxes. The town's chatter paused for a moment, but soon the laughter started. "Look at old John, gonna tell his stories again," shouted Mr. Anthony, and the crowd laughed as if I were a clown. Michael tossed a mango pit on the ground, right in front of me, and said, "Speak, hero, let's hear it." My hand trembled holding the diary, but I took a deep breath, remembering Mary's words. I escaped with a soul no one broke. I was no longer the useless old man. I was a soldier, and this was my war. "I am John," I began, my voice cutting the air like a blade. "I fought in a war you only know from stories. I saw friends blown apart, heard their last screams, carried their bodies as bullets whizzed by. I didn't come back a hero. I came back a man who still dreams of blood." The town fell quiet, the laughter choked. I saw Mrs. Agnes lower her eyes as if ashamed. I continued, raising the diary. "And this is the story of Mary, my wife, who faced a hell none of you can imagine." I read her words, chosen carefully. "I was 12 when I was sold. Locked in a room, I prayed to die, but something in me wouldn't give up. I told how she planned her escape, stealing coins by candlelight, how she ran barefoot until her feet bled, how she learned to sew to survive. Mary is stronger than any soldier," I said, my voice trembling with pride, "and you call her a shame, without knowing what she overcame." The silence was heavy, as if the entire square held its breath. I saw tears in Mrs. Clare's eyes, who always whispered about Mary. Michael, the apple thrower, stood with his head down, his cigarette gone out. I turned to myself. I'm not the crazy old man you think. I fought for this country, risked my life for men who never came back. And what do I get? Rotten apples, spit, laughter. My voice rose, loaded with years of anger. Mary and I are survivors, and we deserve respect, not your jokes. I finished, clutching the diary to my chest, expecting booze, expecting the worst. But what came was silence, a silence that hurt more than laughter. I stepped off the stage, my legs shaky, thinking I'd failed. Mary ran to me, her eyes wet, and held my hand. "You were incredible," she whispered, but I felt no victory. The town seemed like an untouched wall. Then a voice broke the silence. It was Anna, Mrs. Clare's daughter, a 15-year-old with bright eyes. "Mr. John, Mrs. Mary," she said, running to us. "What you went through, it's more than courage. I want to help." Before I could respond, Mrs. Clare approached, tears streaming. "Forgive me, Mary," she said, her voice choked. "I said awful things without knowing. You're a fortress." Mary, surprised, just nodded, squeezing my hand tighter. Others came. Joe from the store gripped my shoulder and said, "You fought for us, John." I should have listened before. Even Michael, the apple thrower, approached, staring at the ground. "I was an idiot," he muttered. "That apple. Forgive me." I wanted to say something, but my throat was closed. The square, which always crushed us, was starting to crack. Anna, with an energy that reminded me of a young Mary, spoke loudly. "This can't stop here. The town needs to do more." She gathered the young people right there, as the market paused, and proposed something that chilled me. A night to honor all of St. Thomas's elderly, starting with us. "You deserve to be seen," she said, "and we'll fix what we did." That night, as we walked home, Mary and I held hands, something we hadn't done in years. "They listened, John," she said, with a smile that lit up the darkness. I felt the diary in my coat, lighter now, as if it had fulfilled its purpose. The town hadn't changed in a blink, but something broke. The wall of scorn that trapped us. Anna and the others were planning the event, and for the first time, I felt St. Thomas could be more than a battlefield. Mary looked at me, her eyes shining, and said, "You gave me my voice back." And I knew that, together, we'd started a war we wouldn't lose. The night after, the market was the first in years I slept without nightmares. Anna's words, "the girl who promised to transform St. Thomas," echoed in my head like a drum of hope. I, John, had climbed that stage with Mary's diary, facing laughter and spit, and something changed. The town, which always crushed us with rotten apples and gossip, began to crack. Mrs. Clare asked Mary's forgiveness, Michael confessed his shame, and Anna swore our story wouldn't die in the square. As Mary and I walked home, hand in hand under the moonlight, she smiled and said, "You made them listen, John." But I knew it wasn't the end. The battle we started at the market was just beginning, and St. Thomas would never be the same. The days that followed were like a crooked dream. The town, which once avoided us like we were a plague, began to see us. At the store, Joe handed me a sack of flour for free, his eyes lowered. "You fought for this country, John," he said. "I was blind for too long." I wanted to refuse, but he insisted, and for the first time, I felt I wasn't just a useless old man. Mary changed too. She, who lived hidden, began walking with her head high. One day, I saw Mrs. Agnes, who always whispered about her dirty past, approach her at church. "Forgive me, Mary," she said tearfully. "I spoke things I never should have." Mary, with the strength only she has, replied, "You didn't know. Now you do." And they embraced, while I watched, my chest tight with pride. But the weight of the past didn't vanish. My nightmares returned, bringing the faces of friends I lost in the war, their voices begging me not to forget them. Mary carried her shadows too. Sometimes I found her on the porch, staring into the void as if still hearing the locks of the room where she was a prisoner at 12. "The town's look stopped," she told me one night, "but the memories don't." I hugged her, feeling her fragile body against mine, and promised, "We'll turn those memories into something bigger." The diary, once her trapped scream, was now our weapon, and Anna was determined to use it. The town mobilized like never before. Anna, with the energy of someone who believes in change, gathered young and old to organize the tribute night. They hung lanterns in the square, painted a mural with excerpts from Mary's diary, and built a stage bigger than the markets. Michael, the boy who threw the apple, worked harder than anyone, as if trying to erase his guilt with every nail he hammered. He came to me, head lowered, and said, "I didn't know what you went through, John. I want my kids to know." I showed him my medals, stored for years in a shoebox, and told him about Peter, the soldier who died in my arms. Michael listened, tears in his eyes, and promised, "No one will call you crazy again." The night of the event arrived, and the square was unrecognizable. Lanterns glowed like stars, flowers covered the ground, and the mural displayed Mary's words, "I escaped with a soul no one broke." The entire town was there, even the mayor, who never looked at us. Anna took the stage, with a courage that reminded me of a young Mary, and spoke. "John and Mary aren't just elderly. They're warriors who faced seen and unseen wars. We hurt them, but today we fix that." She read excerpts from the diary, her voice trembling, and told of my war, of the men I saved and lost. The crowd applauded, and I felt Mary squeeze my hand, her eyes wet with something that wasn't pain anymore. It was pride. When they called us to the stage, the town gave us a standing ovation. I didn't know what to say, so I just thanked them, my voice hoarse. Mary, who always hid, spoke for the first time in public. "I wrote that diary so I wouldn't lose myself. Today, I see it found you." The applause was deafening, but what came next was bigger than any sound. Anna revealed that the town would create a permanent archive, a book with the stories of all the elderly, so no one would be forgotten again. "It starts with John and Mary," she said, "but it's for everyone we silenced." And then, the bombshell that changed everything. Michael took the stage, holding a box. Inside was a bronze plaque, engraved with our names, John and Mary, who taught St. Thomas to listen. But he didn't stop there. With a trembling voice he confessed, "My grandmother was sold like Mary, at 14. She never told out of shame until she heard your story." He cried, and the square fell silent. Then a woman, Mrs. Lucy, stood and said, "My father died in the war, like John's friends." I hid the pain because I thought no one cared. One by one others rose, revealing scars. A man who lost his sister to abuse. An elderly woman who kept letters from a love lost in battle. Our courage opened St. Thomas, and the square became a sea of tears, hugs, and truths. Mary looked at me, with a smile worth more than any medal, and whispered, "We did this, John." Today Mary's diary sits on a pedestal in the square, next to my medals, for anyone to know. Our house still creaks, but now we have visitors. Anna, Michael, even Mrs. Agnes, who brings cakes and asks for stories. We're no longer the useless old man and the tainted woman. We're John and Mary, the ones who broke the silence. And here's the truth that burns. Every town, every city, has a hidden diary, a stifled voice. Don't let those stories die. Go to that elderly person on your street, listen to what they hold, because every wrinkle is a battlefield, every silence a war. Subscribe to the channel, share our story, and be the voice that brings those truths to light. Because when a story is heard, it changes the world. We changed St. Thomas. Now, it's up to you.